Anita Baker, and so I know this song is much more a wedding song, kind of marriage song, but I think in relationship in general, we have to be accountable to each other. And so I think oftentimes, we think about these like deep, passionate loves in marriage, but I think we love each other as sisters in these types of spaces as well. So not giving your best to your spouse, but also giving your best to each other and giving your best to your families. So I am not a medical doctor. Any things that you choose to do beyond the talk that we have today, I would strongly encourage you to talk to your medical doctor before implementing. So I like these lyrics, and so I want to read them to you. The scales are sometimes unbalanced, and you bear the weight of all that has to be. I hope that you can lean on me, and together we calm the stormy seas. We love so strong and so unselfishly, and that is something we definitely do as women. Love strong, unselfishly. We will sacrifice ourselves to the end. And I tell you now that I made a vow, I'm giving you the best that I got. I think it is so easy to misconstrue what that best really is, and giving of our best selves. So I think I've seen several posts from your national organization on your Facebook page that talks about self-care. Self-care is so important. I think currently a lot of times there's this kind of like misconception that self-care is things related to extravagance, but honestly, at its foundational level, self-care is really just doing the things that are important to taking care of yourself. Sleeping, eating, making time for yourself, debriefing. All of those things are going to be necessary for us to be our best selves. And so I love this post, hence I'm sharing it. But it is so important for us to live our best lives and take care of ourselves. So when it comes to basically thinking about our work-life balance, you guys summed it up perfectly here. It is important to consider, reducing stress where you can, making sure that you are planning and prioritizing, thinking about the things that you want to do and the goals that you want to reach, making sure that you stay active as well as staying connected. The beauty of things like this is that you guys will come to conference, you will see each other year after year, you will continue to keep these connections. These relationships are so important. And it's very important that we consider what we're bringing to the table, what we are bringing to others, what we are giving our children, what we are giving our spouses. If you are not taking care of yourself, you aren't giving them your best self. So many children, they reach those pivotal years and their moms are sick or struggling. And it's sometimes those are things that we have done to ourselves because we have chosen not to prioritize ourselves as part of our day-to-day life. And so it's very, very, very important that you are thinking about who you present yourself to as the world and making sure that that person is the best you. So to get to the topic at hand, what is diabetes? In the most simplest terms, diabetes in essence is the inability of your body to actually appropriately respond to energy intake. So for instance, a lot of people hear about diabetes as the sugar or something like that. A large part of that comes from your inability to properly process sugar. So when you eat a meal, your body, your digestive system will release some of those nutrients in different places. One of those nutrients is our glucose, or those sugars. When your blood glucose increases, you release a hormone called insulin. Okay? And so that's coming from our pancreas. The insulin is going to signal in multiple places in our body. Insulin is going to signal to things like our liver, but it will also signal to our brain, our fat, and our muscles. If you are not appropriately responding to that insulin, that's going to cause a multitude of issues. Okay? And so When I mentioned earlier insulin resistance is you're producing the insulin in response to the glucose, but these downstream places, so like our liver, our brain, our muscles, are not responding very well to that insulin. And that's not a good place to be in. Sometimes the insulin resistance can be a thing that happens over time. Sometimes that insulin resistance can be in response to conditions that we may have been born with. But either way, when it comes to insulin, the best thing for your health is to be as sensitive to it as possible. And so, as you can see from this very detailed diagram, once that insulin is released, it allows for your fat to store excess energy. It allows your brain to utilize those sugars to produce energy in the form of what we call here ATP. We also can then utilize glucose in our muscles, but if we have so much glucose that we don't need it all, we can also sometimes store some of the excess glucose in our muscles as well. And so ultimately, what you want to think about is if I have a normal response to a meal, glucose should make me secrete insulin, which should then help me take up the excess nutrients. If there is something wrong in that process, then what you often will see is the accumulation of those nutrients in places where they shouldn't be. So for instance, a lot of times when people are tested for diabetes, you'll hear about blood glucose numbers. If you're not able to properly take up that glucose, that's going to cause you to have a high blood glucose. Having high blood glucose is very, very dangerous for your organs. Because glucose can make things sticky. Just like when you touch Kool-Aid, if your Kool-Aid dries on the table, it becomes sticky. Glucose on proteins in your body can be sticky, and that's where you can have some of those complications. So for instance, you've heard of sometimes type 2 diabetics who go on to have strokes, or type 2 diabetics who have these different diseases related, or disease processes related to like clotting. It's because having that excess glucose around for a period of time is not good for your organs. It's also really not good for your eyes, and that's where you hear about the different retinopathies and those different conditions. And so one important thing to think about when it comes to balancing these things is A, what can I do to make myself more insulin sensitive? But what can I do to reduce the amount of glucose that is floating around free? So when we look at the statistics, when it comes to diabetes and black people in general, African American adults were 60% more likely than non-Hispanic white adults to be diagnosed with diabetes. And so what you can see here is, in essence, when you look at your age-adjusted percentages, you can see we're almost 2 times more likely than others. When it comes to looking at it from the perspective of women and men, as black women, we are also more likely than our peers, our non-Hispanic white peers, to be diagnosed with diabetes. One thing that I didn't put any slides in here about, but I will mention, is that sometimes this doesn't always show up when we're younger, and that's because sometimes we have, so the estrogen itself can be a little bit protective, and so when you're younger and you have more estrogen, sometimes you are protected from this diabetes, and that's where you'll see this cliff happening when people start to go through menopause and their estrogen drops, because then all of a sudden you start seeing a bunch of people get diagnosed with diabetes because they're no longer as protected. And so that's why it's very important to start before that point to prevent anything from happening later on. Okay? Not only do we have more diabetes, we're also dying more from diabetes and its complications. So for me, this is really personal, because in essence, both my grandmothers ended up losing their lives related to complications to type 2 diabetes. And so you will be surprised at the amount of conditions that can occur once you have diabetes. You become very, very sensitive to some very, very scary things when you get diabetes. And so we have to do a better job of taking care of ourselves. And so some of the things that we're doing that are predisposing us are things that are outside of our control, but some things are. So when we think about performing our best, with the rates like that, we're not giving our best, right? Like, having high rates of diabetes like that is not optimal, because we want to live long lives so that we can continue to pour into the next generation, and you want to be able to be around for great-grands. Like, isn't it a beautiful thing when you see those pictures of multi-generational families? You want to be in those multi-generational pictures, and avoiding things like diabetes is going to be very important for that. And I'm not saying that you can't live a long life with diabetes. I would say it's more difficult. You have to be very diligent. So when it comes to thinking about poor health outcomes, one thing that we can think about are some of the external and internal things that can happen. And so, for instance, when it comes to things like diabetes, there is like the genetic predisposition piece, which you can't control. You are who you are. You're born from the family that you are born from. But knowing that family history should be informative. It should be the thing that drives you to consider, what can I do to avoid this thing downstream? Other things that are sometimes a product of our choices are things like having higher cholesterol. So if you eat a diet high in ultra-processed foods or quick, simple foods that you get from the shelf, sometimes that can lead to increased cholesterol, which is not helpful for us and can lead to bad outcomes. I think sometimes these two are very connected: stress and high blood pressure. Obesity is something else that can help connect to these poor outcomes. And lack of sleep and lack of taking care of your mental health can also lead to poor outcomes. Because oftentimes, for some people, poor mental health leads to like the equivalent of a continuous stress response if we're not careful. And that stress response is not meant to happen perpetually. Okay? And so first, I think, unfortunately, because of the world that we live in, one large thing that connects to a lot of poor outcomes in Black women is racism. And it's that connection to how we're treated when we go to the doctor. Our concerns aren't being taken, seriously, as well as we don't go to the doctor enough. We take everybody else to the doctor, but we don't necessarily go ourselves, and things of that nature. And so, but also, because we work in these mixed environments, we also deal with microaggressions. And so this is another one of your lovely infographics pointing out, how microaggressions impact us. And so microaggressions and people kind of being passive aggressive and saying very unkind things can lead to all kinds of issues with us. And the one I'm pointing out most today is this physical health piece. Okay? Because again, if you are unhappy and stressed at work, your body is going to feel that. And so you are going to have to find ways to help to cope with those things. And so this is an infographic, unfortunately not from you all, that kind of talks about some strategies for coping. And so this is where having that person who drives you up the wall, maybe limiting how much you talk to that person, or not holding it all in. So having those stressful moments at work, and then finding a therapist, finding a community group, using church, doing things to relieve that stress. It's going to be very, very important that you don't hold on to those things because that is a weight that your body does not want to carry forever. And another thing is making sure that you are practicing self-care. So doing those things to make sure that you restore that balance within yourself. Okay? When it comes to some of those poor health outcome factors, I'm going to just talk about 3 more of those. And so the 3 I'm going to focus in on are stress, obesity, and lack of sleep. And so when it comes to stress, and so that's not just the stress of work and the stress of microaggressions, but it may be the stress of being a parent to 2 very active teenagers who go all over the place, right? Like, you have to find a way to kind of navigate that. So when it comes to the science of stress, so stress is something that I think our bodies are still navigating how to deal with. So when, I guess when people were less domestic and were more, I guess, nomadic and worked outside, our bodies had what we call the fight or flight response, okay? So if a big bear is coming, that fight or flight response is gonna tell you to either get out of there or you're gonna be stuck, right? That is a normal, thank you. That is a normal response. The problem that we have, however, is that we're perpetually in that response. Okay? So, all right, sorry. So, I put a couple of the hormone names on the slide, but don't be afraid of the hormone names. So, one thing that I didn't show you on the slide when I showed you the liver and the muscle and the brain and all of those things, I showed you what happens in response to eating a meal. When your body is going through something like starvation or fight or flight, you can think about that as an opposing process, okay? So when we have insulin produced, that is our body's way. We're either gonna use that energy immediately or we're gonna store it. And so that's why, like, for instance, you saw the adipose, making fat, things of that nature. When it comes to epinephrine, you want to do the opposite. If you're trying to run away, you need sugar. You need the energy to get away. So what will happen is you will release that epinephrine. That epinephrine will tell things like your muscle to release a bunch of sugar so that you can run away. It'll tell your liver, okay, let's pump out some sugar so that we can give the other tissues in our body the energy needed to get away. Okay? And so you can kind of think about that as something that will eventually deplete you if you don't restore it. And so what often happens is when you have persistent epinephrine, you're in a persistent flight state. And so that's where you see this like increased incidence of things related to blood pressure issues, or this increased incidence of things like heart attacks and strokes, because your body does not want to be perpetually running away from the bear. Okay? And so I think we have to find ways to slow that down. Another thing that happens in response to that increased epinephrine is that now that we've tried to deplete a bunch of things to run away, we're going to produce cortisol. And cortisol is coming in to try to help replenish. And so what often happens in response to that cortisol is that you may eat more, okay? But now you're eating more, you're replenishing, and sometimes you over-replenish, right? So now we go from, okay, I've used all this store of energy in this tissue. I've eaten so much that now I need to make new versions of stores. And so what ends up happening is that now, where you might have had like one little pocket of fat in a certain place, now you're starting to get multiple new pockets of fat in different places. And sometimes those pockets of fat are not just in like your abdomen. Sometimes they're in your liver or places where they shouldn't be. And so it's very, very important to not push your body to these extremes cut over and over and over again, okay? Because then you'll be in excess. And so when it comes to coping with stress, I think one that I use a lot when I was in graduate school is the physical activity one. But not so much, I'm not a runner or any of that stuff, but like I enjoy walking, and Zumba was fun. So have a hard day, I would dedicate that 1 hour where I could go and release that energy, right? So that I could de-stress and start a new day. And so I would say sometimes when the person at work is getting on your nerves, you may just be like, I'm gonna go take a walk. And then just go in and take that walk so that you can then, come down and start calming down, and so that you're not holding on to that stress. Another important thing is that social support, and I think having someone that you can vent to or having a therapist is also very useful in coping with stress. And then the third one is deep breathing. I will say for me, this one is harder for me because I don't sometimes want to stop in the moment. And I think what deep breathing does is it forces you to stop and kind of reset your breathing, okay? Because when we talked about like the heart beating fast, the heart is beating fast is trying to get you to take in a bunch of oxygen to process that energy. And so deep breathing kind of stops you and forces you to focus. And so then on the next slide, we're going to practice deep breathing, because what fun would it not be to force you to do something I don't enjoy doing either, okay? So, but it's very important. And I think what I'm saying here is that sometimes you just have to take a pause, right? Like you can't push through it all. That's not going to be good for you. And so sometimes it might be, I get off this stressful phone call and I'm gonna deep breathe for like 5 minutes, right? I'm taking the pause, I'm allowing myself to reset. And so I think we'll do a couple of rounds of this. And so you're already sitting comfortably in your chair. What we're gonna do is we're gonna breathe in to a count of 5 in our nose, and then we'll breathe out, and you can say the numbers with me if you would like, out of your mouth, okay? The idea being that you're trying to force yourself to relax. Alrighty? So y'all ready to breathe in? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, y'all ready to breathe in again? Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And one more time. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? In those moments of high stress, it's really hard to stay stressed when you stop and taking some deep breaths. It helps your body to reset. It helps your body to, okay, let me think through now what I want to do. You've allowed yourself to kind of get out of that fight or flight immediate response, and now you're starting to kind of allow yourself to channel and think through, okay, how do I actually want to respond to this person or this thing that has caused this stress? There are lots of other deep breathing related techniques that you can find, deep breathing exercises. I even have like a phone app related to mental health related things. And one of the things that it has on there is like, it in essence has a box that allows you to do breathing exercises. There are lots of tools. I think even like, if for instance you have like a Samsung phone, like their health app has the ability to do breathing exercises. In times of stress, where you feel that overwhelm and you're trying to come down, sometimes stopping and breathing can get you back to center, okay? And so, unfortunately, African American women have the highest rate of obesity or being overweight compared to other groups. And so one disclaimer I want to give here, because I think sometimes when people see that, they get to this mindset of like shaming, and I don't think that's where we should go. The ultimate goal with these types of topics should not be necessarily thinness, but actual cardiovascular health. Okay? So as a scientist, I know about the BMI scale, it's a body mass index. It was not based on us, right? And so you will see where people will, talk about BMI, and what you'll find is that someone may have more muscle mass, which is distorting their BMI number, causing them to seem overweight when in reality they're fine. And so I'm not saying this to you to make you focus in on that number, but to really think about, am I actually carrying more weight than I should be? Because I think our bodies will tell us, right? Like that's where I start picking up weight, my knees start hurting a little bit, or things of that nature. And so I think listening to your body, am I carrying around weight that I should not be carrying around? Can I not walk as far as I used to be able to walk? Like using those cues and striving to set goals related to that. Okay? So not getting so hung up on what the number on the scale looks like, but really thinking about, do I feel healthy at the weight that I am? And if you don't feel healthy, striving to find ways to make yourself feel better. Okay? So unfortunately, people who are overweight are more likely to have high blood pressure, high levels of fat in their blood, and diabetes, as well as increased risk for heart disease and stroke. And as Black women, I'm sure we all have heard about the Wear Red days and things of that nature, and the prevalence of heart disease killing us or whatever. And so that's where it becomes very, very important to think about our cardiovascular health. And so this is where physical activity is very important, okay? And so when we look at the percentages of African American people or Black people relative to others in our physical activity, we are not moving like we should be, okay? And I acknowledge that it is a commitment because it takes time to move, but it's a very important thing to do. And I will say, it's easier to start small than it is to try to overcome really large barriers. And so making sure that as part of bringing your best self, taking care of yourself, that you are attempting to make time to be active. And that activity doesn't have to be solo. It can be with other people. It can be Zumba, or it can be, we go walk. We have a walking group that meets at the track every day or something for 30 minutes. And it can be those increments of 30 minutes, 5 days a week. Just finding that 30 minutes, 5 days a week. Another thing to consider with that though is also, what are you eating? Sometimes it is really easy for us to overconsume because of what we're eating. So sometimes when we think about, some of our more traditional dishes that have been villainized, sometimes those things were more complete than things like McDonald's will ever be, okay? And so I think it really becomes a matter of thinking about balance and thinking about how much you're consuming. When it comes to a lot of our shelf-stable foods, those things are what's called ultra-processed foods. They are made to taste good, and they are made to break down easy. The problem with that, though, is that your body can easily get overwhelmed by the amount of those things that you're consuming. Because it is really easy to overeat when you are eating something ultra-processed. One big tip that I've seen a couple of times recently is this idea of eating veggies or eating your most fibrous foods first, with the idea being that you are likely to feel fuller faster and less likely to overeat. And so I don't know why I have the habit of eating vegetables foods first, but that's been like my go-to thing in life, probably because I wanted to save the best for last, and so I ate the vegetables first. But making sure that you are consciously considering what you're eating first and how it will impact you. And so that's also where like people think about, for instance, like high glycemic foods and low glycemic foods and things of that nature. Because ultimately, as fast as those things break down, they cause spikes in your glucose. If it's something that can be broken down really quickly and easily, so like for instance, when somebody is a type 1 diabetic and their sugar is low, you give them like candy or crackers or things that have sugar that's going to break down really quickly, right? Because you are trying to get their blood glucose back up. You don't want to eat that all the time because you don't need to be spiking your blood glucose like that. And so making sure that you are being very careful about that. I will say another cool conversation I heard as part of the conversations that were happening over lunch was this idea of protein intake. Oftentimes women are not eating enough protein either. Sometimes we'll eat these, I'll call them daintier meals that don't necessarily have a lot of heft to them. Eating fiber, eating protein, those things are very important for building up your body. So you can't make protein out of nowhere. Like the majority, so for the sake of mentioning it, when I think about protein as a scientist, proteins are made of these molecules called amino acids. Most of our amino acids are not things that we create ourselves. They are things that we eat. And so you have to get them from somewhere else. And so that's why it's so important that when you are eating a balanced diet and you are considering those nutrients and those different components. Because you can't, unfortunately, our bodies do not synthesize everything that they need. And so some things we will have to consume. And so making sure that you're eating protein, making sure that you're getting calcium, making sure that you're getting vitamin D, like all of those things are very important. Getting fiber, and the beauty of fiber, for the sake of a simplistic description, is that so if we have a fiber molecule and a sugar molecule, you can imagine a fiber molecule maybe like 10 times bigger, right? And so a fiber molecule and a sugar molecule sometimes are competing for the same place to be activated. And so if you have more bulky things blocking those places, it's less easy for those small things to get in. And so when we think about eating our diets, eating our food, eating fiber first, the beauty of that is it prevents us from taking up too much of the small molecules, too much of the sugar, the simple things. All right. So make sure, another thing, and this is something I also struggle with, take your time. Your body responds hormonally to things. If you eat your food too fast, your hormones can't catch up. And so you need to take your time and pace yourself. Because if you shovel it all in, then you're likely to overeat. And so taking your time, pacing yourself. Some people even use timers where they will set a timer and eat for a certain amount of time, pause to let their hormones catch up, and then continue to eat. The beauty of that is that you're less likely to overeat that way. Because if we're really, and then the other part is, if you're eating too fast, you are not chewing the food up well. And so you're less likely to absorb it anyway. Another good 2 tips, intermittent fasting is something that some people are doing nowadays. The beauty of intermittent fasting, for the sake of mentioning what it is basically you only eat for a certain window of time, and then the rest of the time you are in essence fasting. And so what some people will do is they will intermittent fast, where they'll do, I think it's like 16-8 kind of thing. 16. Yeah, where they only eat for 8 hours and then 16 hours they don't eat. The beauty of that is that you're less likely to eat foods at the wrong time of day. Because you don't want to eat a ton of food late at night. That is not good for your body. Because you're not moving anymore late at night. So what are you doing with that extra energy? You're just packing it on. And so intermittent fasting is a good way to do it. Other people just don't eat at night, eat late at night or whatever, as an attempt to do the same kind of idea. But ultimately, being careful about when you're eating some of these foods, and then moving your body. So my father-in-law was really good about, so he was a type 1 diabetic, but what he would do is he would eat his meal and he would just go take a little 15-minute walk. The beauty of that is any excess energy he took up is burned by that walk. And so I would say, really pay attention to your body, move your body, but don't overfill your body all the time. And so, again, my soapbox, a thin body is not always a healthy body. And so you want to strive for good cardiovascular health. What does the best version of me feel like? Is that best version of me somebody who can walk, 2 hours a day with no problem? Really thinking about when do I feel my best? And then last but not least is sleep. So sleep is so important. And some of us really, really undervalue sleep. And that's dangerous. And I think it's not only dangerous for our cardiovascular health, it's also dangerous for our brain health. Because there have been associations where with people who are not getting enough sleep having increased incidence of things like Alzheimer's. So you want to really protect your brain by getting sleep. Okay? And so when you don't get enough sleep, you're not giving your body the time to reset, to heal, to process. Okay? Your body needs time to do these things. And it's not going to do it in like a 4-hour window. Okay? And so you need to get I think some people say, 6 to 9 hours a night? So finding time to prioritize getting that sleep. Because not getting enough sleep is going to not only impact your ability to process the foods that you eat in the day, but it's also going to cause inflammation. And that inflammation is not good for your organs again, okay? And so we really, really want to make sure that we are doing our due diligence. We're feeding ourselves and feeding ourselves well, but we are also sleeping. So, some helpful tips. Set a bedtime goal. I know that every day won't be the same. You won't be able to reach that goal every day, but I at the same time every night is very helpful for our bodies because they like a rhythm. We like predictability. Okay? Having a quiet, dark, cool place can be very helpful as far as being able to relax and get the best quality sleep. I personally cannot sleep in environments with a lot of noise. It's hard for me because that noise infiltrates my sleep. And so I would say, consider how do you sleep the best? What is your best sleep? Setting that environment up. Another thing, unplugging. The blue light is not good for our circadian rhythm. It messes with our ability to really fall asleep like we should. And so finding time and finding the ability to unplug. I'm not as dedicated as the people on the internet suggest that you should be, because there are people who are like, don't put your phone or anything in the room. I can't do it. But I try not to look at it when I know that I'm going to sleep, when I am intentionally trying to get that sleep. Avoid large meals, because you're not going to be comfortable when you're bloated anyway trying to go to sleep. Avoid stimulants, things like caffeine, and honestly, be very careful about alcohol, because alcohol, although we think of it as a downer, sometimes will also inhibit your ability to get good quality sleep. And then, not so much like immediately before you go to sleep, but if during that day you have moved your body, the odds that you will get better quality sleep is usually higher. And then another one of your wonderful infographics. Prioritize sleep. Engage in physical activity. And then we didn't talk about setting boundaries today, but that's one I also struggle with. And then the mindfulness and pieces. So again, y'all are saying all the great things. Like your Facebook page is telling you all these things that are important for preventing diabetes. But are we listening? Are we being our best selves? Are we bringing our best selves to the table? So this is just the beginning, is what we'll call it. So I planted some seeds. I'm hoping that now that I've planted some seeds, you'll start to set some goals. Okay? So we have to do better about being our best selves. So the don't pick that up, that was me talking about the racism piece. Somebody's putting out negative energy, you don't have to take that negative energy on. Leave that there. You can't control other people. You can control yourself and your response to those other people. Okay? Create and maintain community like the one that you have. Being in community is going to be very good for your mental health. It's good for your peace. You know, you can have the ability to cope with others, but also likely it will keep you active because you got to move around with each other, right? When it comes to eating, making sure that you are eating as many whole foods as possible, things that have fiber in them, things that have protein in them, things that keep you fuller for longer, but also thinking about some of our other nutrients. So as women, are we consuming calcium? Because we don't want bone density issues, you know, and when are we eating the food that we're eating? Move your body, and rest is productive, okay? So even though you feel like I'm just here in La La Land, your body is doing a multitude of things to make you your best self when you give it rest. So I encourage you to set some goals and find some accountability within the people in the room even, or people in your local chapters or things of that nature. Find accountability, set some goals. Don't set too many though, so be realistic. Because if you set like 6 goals, you are setting yourself up to fail. I would say set like 1 or 2. Okay, so say I want to walk 30 minutes 3 days a week. Maybe that's your starting goal, you know, and then commit to doing that for a period of time, and then you can build on your goals, you know, but don't overdo it. Okay, be very, very mindful about being your best self. So here's some more lyrics. Somebody understands me. Somebody gave her heart to me. I stumbled my whole life long, always on my own. Now I'm home. And the weary mind is rested, and I feel as if my home is in your arms, my sister's arms, right? My fears are all gone. I like the sound of your song, and I think I want to sing it forever. Meaning living for a long time, okay? We love so strong and so unselfishly. And so I made a vow to y'all in the room. Hopefully y'all made one to me too. You said this one go. That I'm giving you the best that I got. And I hope you give me and your organization the best that you have. All right.
Beautiful. Quick question. Thanks for the presentation. I didn't wear, sorry I arrived late, but I'm glad that I'm here. I do want to ask you, what do you offer to us as an option for calcium intake?
So what some people will do is they'll do like calcium supplemented things like orange juice, or they'll do like yogurts or things of that nature. And then there's also sometimes the calcium supplements themselves. So I would say looking for calcium fortified things or consuming things that have, I'm trying to think, so be careful sometimes with things like spinach, because I want to say spinach sometimes can be good for those types of things, but the spinach also has things that are not good for you, like it leads to kidney stones if you're not sure. So I would say just really looking at that nutrient labels and seeing if it contains calcium, as well as, and another thing to note about calcium is if you're taking iron at the same time, you're not going to take up the calcium deal with it. So be careful about